According to the Roy of the Rebbe, to learn Hilchos Abchira in the days when Metzorim, we have the honor today to have a Choshev in German, the Mennayel from Beis Rivke, Harav Yosef Mינקאוויטש, is going to give us some insight into the building of the Beis Hamikdash, and as the Roy of the Rebbe to give Tzedakah B'tzibur, everybody please, was wir legen geben Tzedakah B'tzibur, und wir reichen sein zu alle gute Sachen. Harav Mינקאוויטש, בבקשה.
הבחירה עם פרק פעם, ועשם המקדש שבע כלים. נרחם durch den Mizbeach und statt der Meneire וכו'. Und der Orden wird bekanntlich gebracht.
Aber English.
Von den Shiva Kelim.
In Anglit.
Anglit? Oh, sorry. In der Rambam Hilchos Beis Abchira, the first Perek, in Halacha Vov, the Rambam brings down that you make Beis Hamikdash, you have to make a number of Kelim. It's a Shiva Kelim, 7 Kelim, and included amongst that is the Mizbeach and the Meneira, the Shulchan, and the Orden itself is not even mentioned. The Orden is not mentioned amongst the Kelim. Not only that, it's not even mentioned how to make the Orden, about the Orden. It's a mitzvah to make the Orden. It doesn't say that it's one of the mitzvahs to make the Orden. The Rambam think it doesn't count it as a mitzvah. Later on, the Rambam does talk about the Orden in Perek Dalet, beginning of Perek Dalet, that he says there was an Eben in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and the Orden was laying there, and the whole Arichis, that Shlomo HaMelech, when he built the Beis Hamikdash, he made a place for it, and the Bakal, deep down in the tunnels, he was able to place that Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed, to be able to put it there. So that's a shalah for itself. Maybe we'll have enough time, we'll get to that also. But in the Orden, is brought down in Klei HaMikdash. So the Rambam brings down the Eishem Alichin is Orden B'Mokim L'Mokim, where the Orden has to be moved from place to place. Eim Alichin Eiseh Le'al Abheima V'Le'al Agolis. You do not transport it by putting it on an animal, on a behemoth, and not on a wagon. And it says, the fish Shachar David V'Nesoy Al Agolis, David forgot, or he made a mistake, or forgot a different Neschoyes. It's in Gemara, the Rambam says Shachach. Nifras Perez Beuza. We know that when David HaMelech transported the Orden to Ir David, he wanted to bring it to Ir David, so it was done on an agolis, it was done on a wagon. And Uzzah was standing right nearby and was afraid that it was going to turn over, so he grabbed it, and he passed away just from touching the Orden when he was afraid that it might slip. And he says, Mitzvah that it has to be placed on the shoulder. That this is a holy work, it says in Pashas Nosei, so this has to be done by kesef, it has to be carried on the shoulders. So this is the Rambam. Now there's a shaila in the Posik, kesef Yisod that the Rambam brings down. It says, he didn't give wagons. Why? They have to carry it on their shoulders. They have to carry it. The mating, they have to carry it. So which kelim did Nekos have to carry? So there's many kelim. Like Rashi and Chumash, Rashi says clearly, the Shulchan, the Meneira, the Mizbeches, everything else. And also the Orden. So, and here the Rambam mentions that when you carry the Orden Mokim, that's the only keli, or the only thing that in the Beis Hamikdash that you have to carry has to be done on a kosef, not on a behemoth, etc. So what about the other keli? And the Rambam doesn't mention anything about it. It's the same posik, but kosef Yisod, the same posik. So be'emes, this shaila, and it's a tmiyah, that it's a machzedek in Eratera, in the Maimer, he brings down this shaila and he says, "B'tzorich Yishuv." You have to answer it. Mikol mokim ekshayid. Then he says, whatever the teretz is going to be, kol haposkim kosvu k'Rambam. All the poskim like the Rambam, that the only thing that you have to carry as a mitzvah is the Orden. So whatever the answer is, but that's what it is. So that's a shaila, and Like by Yesh Liyashiv, in other words. Tzorich Liyashiv. The Minchas Chinuch, who basically lived in the same time as Tzemach Tzedek also, he asked the same exact shaila in Shinai and Tes, and he writes that the Rambam, we just learned, says it only about the Odin. The same thing, the Chinuch also speaks only about the Odin. He said, Bani Eini Mevin. He said, I don't understand. Same shaila. Since we learn it out from the pasuk because of your soul, which is written, it says clearly in Parsha Bamidbar, the Shulchan, the Mizbeach Hazov, everything was part of the Bnei Kos. So why don't they mention it? And at the end, he writes the Tzorich Iyun, and he has a few words. Maybe it's that they have a Kabbalah. That's how it is. But Tzorich Iyun, he has again the Tzorich Iyun. Because the Piyam Avur B'Teirah Kol Avedis Bnei Kos Neis B'Yadayim B'Lei Alagolas. Everything they carried on the shoulders, with a hand on the shoulders, but not B'Tzorich Iyun. It's 3 times Tzorich Iyun. It's not the only time that the Minchas Chinuch has 3 times Tzorich Iyun in 2 lines on the same shaila. So this shaila that Tzemach Tzedek has, the Tzorich Liyashiv and the Minchas Chinuch 3 times. So the Rebbe said by Pashtus you can say, Eben Nufi, you can say that in the Minyan HaMitzvahs, the Rambam wrote a Sefer HaMitzvahs, as we all know. But the Hakdama to Sefer HaMitzvahs, he lays down the Klolim, what's called Shoroshim. It's translated from Arabic, so it's either Klolim or Shoroshim, different words. But just the basics, when do we count a mitzvah? And he goes in Barichas, he goes into explaining that this is in the Shedesh Gimel, Klal Gimel, and the Sefer HaMitzvahs, that we don't count mitzvahs that are not ladeirus. And he gives an example. For example, it says that before Matan Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu was instructed to tell the Yidden to be ready in 3 days that Torah is going to be given. And then it says you're not allowed to leave over Yosef, you're not allowed to leave over Makorban, Adabeker, and other things like that you have, Aseilecha, Sorof. We just learned to make a Sorof. These are all instructions. The Rambam said if you count all of them, just what Moshe Rabbeinu instructed without the mitzvah, there's over 300. There's over 300 that you would count everything that Moshe Rabbeinu was instructed to tell the Yidden, but it's not ladeirus. If it's not ladeirus, it doesn't become a mitzvah. As as a matter of fact, in Klei HaMikdash itself, the Rambam himself says that we learned that a Levi, after 50 years, he can't be doing the Aveda in the Beis HaMikdash, the Mishkan. So the Rambam writes clearly that this is only when they carried it from place to place. It's not a mitzvah that continues for all the generations. The Gemara in Chulin, the Gemara says clearly that mitzvah is only when it's Bakasef Yisod. When you have Bakasef Yisod, they carry it on their shoulders, the Odin, then they also had that stipulation. Because they learned it out from the same pasuk, Avedas Aved, Avedas Masa, so it goes together. So we see this clearly that there's mitzvahs that are mitzvahs written in the Torah, but it's not Neig Ladeirus. So you say because it's not Neig Ladeirus, so therefore the Rambam doesn't count it. But the Shaila still, what about why is the Odin different? That still becomes a Shaila. And the Rambam's son, Rabbi Avram, the son of the Rambam, so he says clearly, he says that the Nesiyah by the carry on the shoulder by the other Kelim doesn't apply because that became bottled. Before the Beis HaMikdash, that thing became bottled. Okay? But that explains partially why we're not counting the Shara Kelim, because it's not Neig Ladeirus. We have to understand the Odin. How is the Odin different? Number one, the Rambam doesn't discuss this at all. Not in the Yad. The Mishnah Torah doesn't explain any difference between the Shara Kelim and the Odin. The only thing it doesn't even mention the Odin. So that already shows us something there. But if it's Kelim and Bakasef Yisod, it doesn't go into that. In the Sefer HaMitzvahs, where the Rambam goes into a lot of details. The Rambam speaks, for example, in this mitzvah itself. The Rambam has a whole arichas in Sefer HaMitzvahs about who carries the Odin. Is it Levim, the way it's Mashma and Chumash, or is it Kehanim? So the Rambam says that really it's Kehanim. the only reason that at the times of Moshe Rabbeinu there weren't too many Kehanim, so the Levim did it. But Bemis is a mitzvah in the Kehanim, and he goes into whole arichos about this. But nevertheless, he doesn't go into any explaining at all the difference between the Shara Kelim, the other Kelim, and the Odin, that becomes a mitzvah l'deilus. Not only that, we can say that the Yikuva, even at the times of the Mishkan, that the Yikuva means that it's a must, that it must be carried a lakosim, must be carried on the shoulders, when the other Kelim did apply that carry a lakosim, but the Yikuva is only the Odin. The other Kelim, if necessary, they're able to carry it other ways also, to carry it in their hands, and even carry even on a wagon. There's the Ravid, in the end of the second Pedic in Tomid, the Rambam asks, the Ravid asks the Shaila, why did Moshe Rabbeinu make the Mizbeach Hazov so small? And he makes a cheshbon, the fires that they needed there, it's not even enough place, they said, between the kronis and this and that, they could all burn themselves. So why didn't they make it any bigger? And he says, if you'll say because it was heavy, he says heavy, so get more Levim to carry it. Or, he says clearly, he says you can carry it on the agolas like the kroshim. It's not because of your soul, it's not likuvet. Come that even then, the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the times of the Mishkan itself, even then it wasn't likuvet. It never was likuvet. So, and this, none of this is discussed in the Rambam or anything else. No, so the Rebbe says that really, the Mokir is a medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah, in the Peidik Hey, Sif Ches. There it says a medrash, an interesting thing. It says that Ma'ulim b'Shevet Levi, the Shevet Levi was special. Mishpachas Kos, Shohoye ben Levi Nesem Asoya Akroshim Me'abrich Me'adon Me'kol Dover Ala Golis. Part of Shevet Levi, they carried on the Agolis. Mishpachas Kohos, they carried on the shoulders. Why? They had no permission to place the orin on the wagons. It says, didn't give them the agolis because of your soul. So what do you see from this? It doesn't mention, what about the other kelim? What about the other kelim? This is speaking about going back to the times of the Mishkan, that they were special, they were told that they have to carry lakosif. If it's a lakosif, it's not just the orin, there's all the other kelim. And the Medrash specifically mentions only the Adon. That's all he mentions. By mentioning only the Adon, it seems that the whole thing of Akos of Yisrael is emphasizing, and the Iker Mitzvah is Dafke, the Inyan from Adon to be Al Akosiv. The other things, is like we said before, it's not Leikuve, and even if it was done only then, and it's not Ladelis. And it's also, in the Mefarshim explain, because right after this halacha, at the Rambam Klei Mikdash, the Rambam says something else. When it's carried, when they do carry it, the Odin on the shoulders, that means they carry the meters, the poles that they put on the shoulders. Neisin panim keneged panim, v'achereim lachutz, ufneim lefnim. When they carried it, so everybody had to face the Odin, which means that the first two had to walk backwards, because they had to walk backwards like this. If they'll turn around, they're putting their backs to the Odin. So they had to face the people who were right in front of them. So they were walking with the bottom to the Odin. But the people who were actually the leaders, they had to walk backwards. And the Kesef Mishnah doesn't give a Maramokim, which usually gives Maramakemis for many of the halachas of the Rambam. And the Kesef Mishnah doesn't mention anything. And some say they can't find the Maramokim. So it's interesting. The Sheila Meishib also actually lived in the same time as the Tzemach Tzedek and the Chinuch, right at the same time. So he writes, "Nimtza Mekeire." Sheila Meishib, Yisrael Natnazon, the Lembergerov. So he writes, "Nimtza Mekeire." The Mokir we couldn't find, and then he says, "V'hagoyin Maram Zalmi Lubavitch." That's the Tzemach Tzedek. Omar Shakem Bevur B'Medrash Shabbat Pashas B'Midbar V'Dibri Pi Chacham Chen. This same Medrash that we just said now, which speaks about the cause of your soul, the next piece of the Medrash, what does it say over there? V'Eid B'Davar Echad Hoyim Ulin that the Bnei Kohos was also something special. What? What were they doing? They shouldn't put them back to the Orden. So this is that it comes out that these two halachas that the Rambam brings down at the end of Perek Beis in Hilchos Klei HaMikdash, these two halachas, like the Sheila Meishiv said, and that Tzemach Tzedek said that the Mokir of the second halacha clearly is from that Medrash. So the first halacha is from the Medrash right before it, the same piece of the Medrash that they carried, and the main thing was the Orden. The Orden, the Kosev is the Orden. That's what they carried. And it's interesting. It comes out now that the Sheila Meishiv said that his shaila that he has Lanimtza Mekeda was answered by Marami Lubavitch. That's what he writes. And the Michas Chinuch, who was very close actually, together with the Sheila Meishiv, we answered also by the Rebbe. The Rebbe is answering the same shaila, that shaila also. The shaila is, in other words, why don't we count the other kelim? And that's why it's many times in Medrash it says that the Bnei Kohos were Teyanei ha'orin. So it's not just because of the chshivas, the Orin for Shesach is more choshev than the other kelim, but this is the ikid that they carried, was Teyanei ha'orin, that was the ikid that they had. So that's answered the klolus of Shiloh. But the Rebbe said, but still, what's the hasbara? It says clearly that because of your soul, that they had to carry all the Klei HaMikdash. So why is there a difference? It comes out there's a difference, an inherent difference right from the outset, that between the kelim and the Orden. No? So this we can answer when the Rambam says, we mentioned before, the Rambam, it says, because it was carried on the wagon, so that created and caused that Uzzah should die because of that. And then a mitzvah, he goes to the mitzvah not ala kosev shanemar aberes kosev because of your soul. So you have an arichos over here. So you have to understand what the Rambam is a sefer halachos. The Rambam says halachos. Telling a story here, Nifrat Speres Buza, man of Kiminda. What is it telling us? It's a pasuk in Chumash. Because of your soul. You need more than that. Because you did this and that, so that's what happened on Maisa, that happened in written in Shmuel and Tarach and Divrei Yomim. Therefore, it tells us about Ma Kesher. And not only that, the Rambam brings the pasuk, because of your soul, he brings at the end. He starts off that the shlila, that you shouldn't you don't put it on a wagon or an animal, and that created the situation that Nifrat Speres Buzo. And then he says, Elo, it's a mitzvah, not like ala kosef. You have to put on the kosef. Why? Because of your soul. So that's the shaila. Once the Rambam turned the twisted around and brings Bechlal this whole story. So with this, the Lashon Rambam comes out very clearly that there's two things that have to do with carrying the Orden. And one thing is that you shouldn't carry it on a wagon or on a behemoth. Another thing is it has to be carried ala kosev. The difference would be, as the Rebbe says, the difference would be if you carry it in your hands, for example. It's not ala kosev, but it's also not on a wagon. So, but it's two separate things, as opposed to an isur to carry it on the wagon. So the question is, why does the Rambam hold this? Why does the Rambam say that it's two separate things? But Pashtus is a posuk, and that's, you don't need more than a posuk. It's a posuk, and that's sufficient. No, so the Rebbe says that there's another shaila that Advaz asks a shaila. The Advaz is printed, it's only certain, maybe now they're printed in the Shuls and Gemaras, the Rambams, they have it over there. Why does the Rambam put this halacha in Perek Beis? Perek Aleph and Perek Beis, the Klei HaMikdash talks about the Shema Mishko, the Keteiros. Later on, Perek Gimel starts talking about Shevet Levi. Perek Dalet starts talking about Kehanim. So you want to bring out the greatness of the Kehanim and the Levim, that they carried the halakos of Yisrael, and then tell the halachas how they have to carry it, v'cholu. It doesn't belong in this Perek. It doesn't belong in this Perek. This Perek talks about the Mikdash itself, what the Mikdash is. No, so in this we see that the Rambam is telling us something very special. The Rambam is saying the Maseh Ha'orim B'Kosef is different because this has to do, it's a prat in the Chefze of the Oren. The Oren must be carried on a Kosef. Not just an Inyan that the Levim have to make sure that they have to carry al Kosef, they have to carry the Oren. In addition to that, the Oren must be carried al Kosef because that is the COVID of the thing. What does that mean? Because we see, but the Levim, it says in Chumash, it was divided when the Klei HaMishkan, or the Mishkan itself, and the Kroshim, everything else has to be moved. There was a lot of movement. The members Masoyos, as we just learned. The members Masoyos, they constantly put up the Mishkan, they had to be moved around. So there are certain things, the Kroshim and the Riyas, everything else was carried, but they Gershon, Merori, and they had Agolis, etc., they carried it that way. Then there were certain things that had to be carried by Bnei Kos, they carried that. That's one thing. But then there's a separate halacha that has to do with the Chefze, the Oren itself, needs a mokim miyuchet. It is a place, a special place. Just like when the Mishkan is on its place, or in the Beis HaMikdash, it had to be in the Kiddush HaKadosh. I mean, that's the mokim, the place of the Oren. When you carry the Oren, it also needs a place, a special place is the Kosef. The special place is the shoulder of a Levi or a Kayin. That special place becomes the place which is the kovid for the Oren. So that's in addition to everything else. This has nothing to do that they have to be carried. Who has to carry? That's the Rambam doesn't even go into the Arichas, doesn't even mention. He said, Ba'esh Melichin. The Rambam said, Shemelichin is Oren Mekhamot. Who's Melichin? Is it a Levi or is it a Kayin? It's a whole machlekes. And the Rambam himself discusses it and Sefer HaMitzvahs, and the Chinuch argues against the Rambam in this. The Rambam doesn't go into it because he's not getting involved with that. He wants to bring out, he's speaking now about the Oren. And that's why it's written before the Peri Gimel and Dala. It speaks about the Levim and the Kehanim. It's not nur Levim and Kehanim. The Oren, the Chefze of the Oren needs a place that has to be placed in a special place. It's not allowed to be placed anywhere, and for sure not allowed to be placed on the animal. It's not allowed to be put up with it. So that's why the Rambam, when the Rambam starts, the halacha, he wants to emphasize this nekuda. The Rambam would have started right off with Kesef Yisrael, and then you'll say, as a titzah, as an outcome of this, an outgrowth of that, so because of that, it cannot go on an agola. The Rambam says the opposite. It cannot go on an agola because that is mevatel, the kovid of the Oren that has to be placed on a separate place. So that's what the Rambam says, that it wasn't in the right place. It wasn't in the right place. The Oren wasn't put in a smoking. Like you put the Oren not in the Kiddush HaKadoshim. It has to have its place. That's what the Rambam is out to be madgish and to emphasize this nekuda, that it must be in the place where it belongs. And then, so what has to be done? His mitzvah, ala koshev, he has to put it and he has to place it on the shoulders of the Levi or the Kayin, whichever it may be. So the Rambam brings out this nakuda that wherever it is, wherever the Oren is, it must always have a mokim miyuchad. So if it's so in other words, if it's placed on the animal, so not only on mevatel, the mitzvah of Nesiyah B'Kosef, and by putting it in the agolis, and that's the difference as be'uza, but this is a reason that the Rambam makes it first to emphasize this nekuda, that it has to be because of Yisrael, is not because of Yisrael that chiv on the Levi, but it's a chiv to make sure that the Oren always has the place where it belongs. And it's interesting with the Rambam's lashon in the first piece. The Rambam says mitzvah lenotli. It's a mitzvah to take it ala kosef, because it doesn't say nesiyah that you have to carry it. Because the main thing is he's take it away from the animal. You're not allowed to put it on the animal. You're not allowed to put it on the agolis. That's that halacha. Later on, when he speaks about Kosef Yisod, that's already telling the Levi or the Kayin that they have to carry it actually on the shoulders. So it comes out that these are two separate inyonim. So this answers the shaila. Why? the other clay kelim are not counted. So first of all, it's not nogladators. So right away there, it's not a mitzvah ladators. It's also, as we see, it's not liikuva. So even though it says, because if you saw in the Pel Mamish, it never said the Pel Mamish, they had no agolas, they had no choice. They had to carry it somehow. So they carried it, the other king, they carried it as they managed, they carried it. They got more levim. But the main thing about the Yikuva was only on the Odin. And then the Odin, that's why you can, just 2 minutes, that what the Rambam mentions in Beis HaBchira, the Rambam mentions, when Shlomo Melech built the Beis HaMikdash, he made sure to have a place to put the Odin. Why dafka the Odin? Because the Odin must be in the Beis HaMikdash. And that's also the reason why the Odin is not even counted as a mitzvah, as part of the mitzvah of Asher HaMikdash. It doesn't say how to make the walls and everything else. Without Odin, it's not a Beis HaMikdash. Everything else are kelim that you serve through that. You can light the menorah, you can do the mizbeach. The Odin has nothing to do. There's nothing to do with the Odin. The Odin, you put it in, and once you put it into the Odin, there's a whole long letter from the Rebbe. The Rebbe wrote in Tov Chavdalet, Rebbe Yitzchak Reiput. He gave out his first sefer, B'dvar Melech. So I remember the Rebbe wrote him a long spirit, and now Kutasik was only a chelik. In Niglas Kedesh, they have the whole letter. The whole letter explains this whole inyan and many other amazing inyanim about the Beis HaMikdash. So that's why it's not written. But once it's done, it's done. It's finished. The Beis HaMikdash is now Kedesh Kadoshim. But at the same time, it has to be someplace. It has to have a mokim, as we said before. So when you carry it, it has to be on the kosef, on the shoulders of a Kohen or a Levi. If it's in the Mishkan standing, it must be in the Kedesh HaKadoshim. If it's not there, so he made L'chatchila a place for it. When the base Bona Shleima, not as an afterthought. When Shleima built, emphasis Bona Shleima, when he built the Beis HaMikdash, that was built deep down in the ground, wherever it is. It was built as a place, a mokim for the base, for the Odin in the Beis HaMikdash in a time when it cannot be in the Kedesh HaKadoshim, but it's still the mokim. The mokim is extremely important. So the mokim is Kedesh HaKadoshim. The mokim could be, if it's buried deep down in the Harabayis, or on the Kosif. So this, even clearly answers all the shilas.
outside people.